Hello, everybody. My name is Hannah Matuda. I'm the Deputy Director at the Northern Virginia Affordable Housing Alliance. On behalf of my colleagues here, welcome to our Lunch and Learn. You've probably heard a familiar theme that people are moving out of the region or into new neighborhoods, or sometimes away entirely. We've all heard personal stories from friends or coworkers who wanted to stay but just couldn't make it work, or newcomers arriving with different needs and expectations. You may have read the report on the donut effect a few years back. What those stories often point back to is housing and how affordable or available it really is, depending on your income, your background, age, or life stage. So today's session is about migration patterns, but more than just the numbers, it's about what those patterns reveal. They tell us something about how people are experiencing life in this region and what it takes to build communities where people can put down roots and call this region home. So, to walk us through what's happening and why, I'm excited to introduce Jill Kneff, Senior Regional Demographer with the Northern Virginia Regional Commission. Jill led the work on the Shifting Migration Patterns of Northern Virginia report and will guide us through the trends that they're seeing and what that might mean moving forward. But with that said, thank you so much for being here, Jill.
Thank you all for having me here. It's a pleasure. And I look forward to presenting these new findings from this report that I authored and released back in January. And I look forward to the discussions after I present the data. So thanks for having me here. And just one note is that I've been under the weather for the past several days, and so I may sound a bit hoarse, so just bear with me on that and may need a lot of water as I'm going through this. So we're going to go through the domestic migration shifts of Northern Virginia. This report that I authored, it shows you the pre and post pandemic migration shifts that have occurred and assesses the phenomenons and changes that have happened since the pandemic which have been pretty vast. It also assesses the impact of these shifts on our population and our local communities and looks at the volume of these phenomenon, such as the migration in versus the out, and how extensive that is. And we look at the housing affordability impacts that are driving this migration, as well as what demographics are shaping the migration. And so a link to the report is there on this page, and with the QR code, you can also link to the report. There's a lot of data in the report and a lot that we're going to go through. So it may be a bit overwhelming with the amount of the data that we're going to go through. So certainly the report is there for you to fall back on and read to help you digest things. But hopefully you'll get the good overview at least of what's in the report from what I'm about to show you. And we're not going to do everything that's in the report, or that would be just data overload for sure. But certainly there's much more in the report than what I'm showing you today. So I encourage you to look at the report and read it. So this report, the reason we did it is because, as we've all heard, that a lot of people are moving out of the region and to lower cost of living places. And those who are moving, the word has been out there that it's the young first-time home buyers, and that it's those people that want to do remote work, that want to live in lower cost areas where they can get better quality housing for the same price that they up here you would get a much smaller space than you would, say, in the outer suburbs of the region if you were to move out. So remote work has really changed things, and this report really looked at that phenomenon and really analyzed what was not reported out there to frame things much better as to how extensive this problem has become and what the volume and scale of the issue is. And we looked at where people are moving from to and what the affordable what the, I should say, the housing incomes are in those places versus here, and also looked at the income and age of those who are moving to see how much that is playing into this effect. So the key highlights and impacts from the findings are that the rise in remote and hybrid work has led to affordable quality living conditions being prioritized over proximity to work. So this is quite a change that are now gonna pretty much live with here on out, because you may hear that a lot of businesses want to bring back their workers, but that is really that's not the most common thing out there for the business world. That's really, it's only a small minority of the businesses that are doing that, even though you may hear that in the media coverage, they really overhype that, and it's really not the truth as to what's happening. Remote work is really here to stay, and it's really the young generations that are pushing that. And generation folks will leave their jobs if and not accept jobs if they can't have that remote work or the hybrid, I should say, so that they can have quality living conditions is really what they're after. And that is really what we're seeing out there today is this big drive from the younger generations and businesses needing to meet their needs, and the planning community also needing to meet the needs for their housing that they want. It's the high living costs that are driving and keeping the young adult workers away. And this has been a problem for the past several years, and it will become more of a problem as the cost of housing continues to rise with the small supply of housing that we have. And with respect to the federal cutbacks and the rising housing that has been on the market over the past couple months, there is still not enough supply, even with this rise in the homes on the market. That doesn't even come close to what is needed. So the demand will definitely keep pushing the home prices up, most likely, or maybe at slower rates, but certainly pushing it up because of the supply not meeting the demand. And that issue is bound to continue, and we're not building housing fast enough. And so changes to the zoning would certainly should be a priority of the region's jurisdictions to try and help solve this issue. The report also illuminates the urgent need for middle income attainable housing and desirable product types for the middle income, because certainly you have homes and condos that are in their price range for these folks that earn up to like 150,000, and those are just not good quality. And it's really the quality that this age group is looking for, and the fact that they can move somewhere else that's cheaper and still have the high paying jobs in this region by being remote or within a commuting distance a few times a week is really what we have to try and learn from and meet the needs for. Rental housing is also, the high price of it is also an issue for the middle income young adults as well. Again, because of the space needs. And so this report's findings that we'll go into will amplifies also the need for businesses struggling to retain and attract the young workers. So there's deep economic impacts if we are not able to solve some of these issues with the housing for these younger folks who don't have equity and cannot afford to even rent, with the average rental prices being in the 2000s. It's a big struggle. It also has an impact because of the foregone tax revenues from these higher income and middle income folks leaving the region and potentially businesses leaving if they can't compete with more affordable regions. The other impact that really is eye-opening is the social inequality and the widening income gap between the young adults and the older adults based on these migration patterns that I'll show you. So first off, we'll look at the population. There's the misconception out there. A lot of the media has focused on the domestic outmigration of Northern Virginia and saying that we're losing population when that's only a small component of our population. You've also got immigration and natural births and natural deaths to account for population growth. So we are growing. So that's important to know that it's mainly the immigration that's one of our largest drivers and why we keep growing. And the domestic outmigration patterns are what are slowing the growth. It would have been much more higher than what you're seeing here had it not been for people leaving the region that reside here. And to go into more detail on that, we've got this chart showing you the population components of change, how much of our population growth has been international migration versus domestic migration and natural change. So domestic migration is the movement of people within the United States. So those moving out of our region into other parts of the US versus those moving into our region from other parts of the US. And it's the domestic migration, the red, where it's negative, which means that we are losing people to other parts of the US rather than gaining from other parts of the US. And this is true for the majority of all large jurisdictions that are unaffordable compared to the small, mid-size and smaller jurisdictions that are much more affordable across the US. So it's not just a Northern Virginia problem for large unaffordable places, I should say, that you're seeing this. And the important thing to note, some important things to see here are first with the natural change, we have been declining in our birth rates in Northern Virginia, and decline in our death rates have been rising, and that's because of the aging of the baby boom population. But the birth rates, together with death rates, have caused our population change to go from around 24,000 in the early 2010s now down to like 16,000 a year. And so certainly we aren't growing as fast with respect to this component of our population. And that will then that can lead to workforce constraints down the road when you have fewer people that reside here for the working age groups. And then with the immigration, that certainly went up extremely high this past year, and one of the pretty much the highest we've seen in decades. This data just came out in March, so it wasn't in our report. The 2024 was not, but I'm showing you this here so that you can see that really immigration is what's keeping our population rising significantly, because you'll see from 2019 to 2023 that the domestic migration was greater than the natural population growth. So those two together were negative. In other words, immigration in those years was the only thing that kept our population growing. And this is going to be more important and a bigger trend over the next couple decades for the entire U.S., not just Northern Virginia, where we're going to rely on immigrants to be able to sustain our population. And sustaining the population is important from the standpoint of the economy and being able to sustain the economy and keep the businesses strong in the region. When we're looking at immigrants, and there was the question in the registration where you all could leave your questions as to what you wanted to understand better. And one of the questions was the immigrants who are moving here, like what age groups are they? And the majority from studies that I've performed here at NVRC, we're seeing that they are largely working class age groups. And it was like, it's around like 80% or so of our immigrants are of the working age group, whereas about 60% of our non-foreign born, or in other words, our native population, 60% is working age. So immigrants are certainly much younger than the native population who are coming here. But the problem is they come here and the affordable housing is an issue. But a lot of the cultures don't mind doubling up in the homes and sharing with multiple generations, unlike native U.S. people that do have preferences towards being independent and living on their own. So the domestic population of our tax filers, I was able to assess throughout this report. Tax filing data from the IRS is the only source available really to go deep into the details that I did. And that data was available through 2022, and it's very eye-opening what this data from the IRS does show us. What you're seeing here is how the out-migration always is outpacing the in-migration, and that the net migration is negative, meaning more out than in. And you're seeing that in 2020, out-migration reached a high of 166,167, but by 2022, it had returned to the pre-pandemic levels, which was around 158,000 is what it returned to. So it's the in-migration that had a different pattern. The in-migration we're seeing is a downward trend. It's been trending down since 2018 and reached a low of 128,012 in 2022. So it's showing that the ensuing elevated negative net migration is attributed to fewer people migrating into the region. So this is an issue in the sense that it's been seen in the business community where businesses have struggled to attract workers. And everything comes down to really largely the affordable housing issue. And living preferences for the young people that are the ones that are most mobile in the U.S. and willing to move between places. But the fact that we're seeing a declining number of people come into our region is, I think, really indicative of this rising housing cost issue that is going to just only worsen over time. In terms of the home values, it's the housing costs that are driving people out of the region, and I keep saying particularly the young adults. And those are the young adults who have been moving here, but also have been moving out. And as we'll see later on, more about that. But want to go into the home values, the bottom tier is the like pretty much the bottom third of all homes on the in our community, not just those on the market, but any home in our community. The bottom tier is that bottom third that your first-time home buyers would be looking for to be able to afford. And these prices that you're seeing here for our region are, for especially the inner jurisdictions, are really out of the range of what like certainly what one person could afford and without being burdened. And then even two people with the incomes of our region, there it's not enough to afford these homes. And to indicate how unaffordable these prices are, we've got the median ranks shown here for all of our jurisdictions, and there's over 3,000 counties in the U.S. And out of the 3,000 plus counties, all of our jurisdictions are ranked between 12 and 259. So we're, in other words, very unaffordable compared to other places in the U.S. And this leads to there being the household cost burden for anyone that does live here. It's really apparent, again, the affordability issues of our region compared to other places. For the renters, you're seeing that Northern Virginia, the dark red, for most of the income levels is significantly higher than Virginia and the U.S. overall. So again, the question becomes, well, if you're a renter, why would you want to live here if you can live in more affordable places with more space and work remotely? It's really if you have lived here for a long time and want to stay here, being able to keep people here near their families and friends becomes really important, and wanting to meet that need of our citizens should be a goal of all of ours that we work towards, because it's not fair to them for them to have to move out when just because they can't afford the living cost here. So it's a problem even for the middle income and the upper incomes, especially on the owner side. Above 100,000 to 149,000, you've got significant burden. You've got 23% of owners that are in that income range that are burdened. And if you are a young adult who doesn't have any equity and able to afford homes with that income, you're going to want to move out. And that's really the case we're seeing, is it's too much of a burden for up to the 150,000 for first-time home buyers. So having more programs to meet this need is really, really something we got to strive for as a region. So we can meet the needs of the business community as well as meet the needs of these people that want to stay here but can't. Where are people moving? This is what we're showing here. We're showing the top 25 jurisdictions in our region where people have moved to. And we're also comparing what was the rate of movement before the pandemic, which was 2017 to 2019, versus after the pandemic, 2020 to 2022, to see if there were noticeable differences in where people are moving to now versus before the pandemic. Now that remote work is something that has become commonplace and here to stay in our society. So of these top 25, that's remained very consistent over time. Since 2017 to 2022, there's only been 29 jurisdictions in our top 25. So hasn't changed much at all. And so this is the fact that these 25 have remained consistent, really can provide a lot of insight knowing as to what the patterns have been between pre-pandemic and post-pandemic. The really insightful thing is how many people really stopped moving to the inner jurisdictions, such as Montgomery County, Prince George's County, and the district, compared to before the pandemic. The percent change really declined greatly for the amount of movement to these inner jurisdictions. Again, that signifies that closeness to work is no longer the priority. Instead, affordability is the priority with post-pandemic societal shifts and remote and hybrid work arrangements allowing for people to live further from work. And so the places that have really grown have been Spotsylvania County, people moving there, and Frederick County, Virginia, which is Winchester. That's Spotsylvania had 56% increase. Frederick County, Virginia, Winchester had 49% increase. And then you have a lot of other places like Richmond that have become very commonplace for people to move to. So this is very insightful of, again, showing that inner jurisdictions are not the preference and living close to work, rather instead affordability is what everybody wants. And what you're seeing here is a comparison of people's income versus the home values for these top 25 destinations versus our jurisdictions for those people that did not migrate. So what you're seeing is the average adjusted gross income is on the x-axis, and on the y-axis, the home values for these various jurisdictions are shown. So if you're below the line, the line, it is a pretty much more affordable place. You get more for your income if you're below the line. So for instance, say you earned an adjusted gross income of say 150,000 approximately, you could live in say let's see, you could live near it's saying Frederick County, Virginia, whereas for home prices that are less than 400,000 for that area. And actually, Frederick County, I'm sorry, is 100,000 income, where you would have a house of less than 400,000. But the equivalent would be something like DC, where for the same income level of 100,000, you'd be paying like over 600,000 for a house. So what are people choosing? They would obviously want their money to go further and be able to spend their income on other means, like such as daily needs such as food and groceries, and not be burdened by the housing costs. So all these places that are below the line, you're less burdened by the housing costs than you are if you would make the same income living here. So the red, I should point out, are our jurisdictions, and those are people that did not migrate. So it's the average income. For instance, Prince William County is 600,000 approximately for the home values, slightly less, with an average adjusted income of 100,000. So that's quite a burden when you look at it that way. So all of our jurisdictions in this region in Northern Virginia are definitely burdened compared to these places people move to. So again, the point being that the majority of people tended to move to the more affordable places. And these are middle income people that are moving out. So we're losing our highly educated, and we're losing the young adults that are the future of our workforce and the future for our business. So being able to keep them here is something we really got to strive for so that our businesses stay strong and can attract workers. So now we'll go into more of the demographics shaping the migration. We've got income, age, and household size that I looked at and have reported on. For incomes, it's the higher income levels are the people that are more likely to move the long distance and be career-based moves. Like as you saw in that last chart, you had people move into Los Angeles and New York. Those are mainly your long distance movers, but it's your lower income levels that often move the short distance for more affordable housing. And also your middle incomes, they'll move for the more affordable housing as well. And for the age, it's the younger individuals that are more likely to migrate. So that's been a long-term trend and something that everybody knows that once you grow older into your mid 40s and 50s, you've settled down at that stage of your life and aren't as mobile. So it's really the young people that are driving our migration patterns. For the household size, the larger households face more challenges in migrating, so they tend to stay put. They also stay put because those larger households tend to be established and have high incomes and have been in the housing market for a long time. So they're not first-time home buyers. Whereas it's the smaller households that find it easier to migrate, and it's the smaller households that typically are just starting out with families and have yet to purchase their first homes. And it's also the renters, which are smaller households typically, and the renters will generally migrate often and be more mobile. It's the young adults that are really driving Northern Virginia's migration shifts. The young adults being those ages 44 and under. They are the lowest average earners among the adult working age groups. And there's been a consistent net loss since 2018 for householders aged 30 to 44 in Northern Virginia. There's been a declining share of the ages 18 to 29 in our region as well. And the reasons again for the losses are the housing costs and people wanting larger spaces. So those places to rent or buy that are within their price range, they're not the ideal places. They're not large or big enough for families. So again, people leaving. So what are the income levels of these people that are leaving here, as well as those who are staying? That's what we're showing here. We're showing the people that have stayed, which are the highest earners. Those are the dark blue lines on both graphs. The highest earners are those staying put. And again, they're well established and likely have had owned their homes for many years, unlike your people that are lower income or middle income that have moved. So the next tier down from the highest income earners are the international movers. The international people that are moving out of our region, that are moving internationally, have the higher income, have relatively high incomes, especially compared to people that are moving just in the US or Virginia or Northern Virginia. The international people that are coming to Northern Virginia have higher incomes than the other groups that are coming to the region from elsewhere. So the international migrants, we certainly have, there's no question we have low income ones coming as well, but we certainly have very educated immigrants coming as well. Uh, a third of our STEM workers in the region are foreign born, so very highly educated. And so it was interesting to see that this wasn't lower down on the spectrum for the incomes, knowing that most people picture the immigrants being the lower income and those filling the retail and construction jobs, which they certainly are in this region. But again, we have high income moving here as well. When it comes to for the out migrants, people that are moving to other states tend to be long distance movers moving for their careers. And so they have incomes that are in the middle of all these other groups. Whereas the lowest of the low who are moving are, as you could see, around in 2022, they had around 100,000 for their income. And that would be the Virginia people moving from outside of Northern Virginia to Virginia, as well as people moving within Northern Virginia to a different county. Those people that are moving had the $100,000 incomes that are moving out, which is certainly a middle income level that is moving. It's not your very low income. So it's people that just at that income level know that they can't afford it here and they want to own a home. So it's typically those wanting to own a home that are moving out. And for the in-migrants, we already touched on the international migrants coming here. But for the people moving to Northern Virginia from other parts of Virginia, that's the lowest on this. And they typically, when people get here that have these lower incomes, they learn that how unaffordable it is and that they can't maintain a quality lifestyle that they want. So eventually those people likely will leave. And that's what we've been experiencing. A lot of businesses will attract college students that had just graduated that don't have much of an higher income yet to be able to afford to really live well off and are just starting their careers. So that's why you're seeing these people migrating in, tending to be the college graduates wanting their first jobs. But then once they've been here a few years, they want to settle down and have quality housing. So then the businesses have struggled to retain them, and they eventually will probably move out unless they can get married and can get higher paying jobs and move up the ladder in businesses. So moving up the ladder and having businesses provide training and opening the doors to promotions and stuff is really gonna help keep these people here, which is what we should all aim for, is trying to keep these people here once they do come. What are the age groups of these people? I've been mentioning a lot that it's the young people, and this is what is the indicator of that, is this information here, where you're seeing the pre-pandemic to the post-pandemic trends for each of the age groups. And it's very clear that your 18 to 24-year-olds are migrating out in greater numbers than they were just a few years ago. And that they migrate out for college, but also because of the cost of living. And it's those people that don't want to live with their families and they want to be independent that tend to be the ones that want to move. And they're very mobile, so they're open to moving anywhere. And they, the 35 to 44-year-olds were the second highest pre-pandemic. And certainly during the pandemic in 2021, a lot of the 35 to 44-year-olds, there was a big increase in the number of people in that age group that moved out. And you can, just based on the information I've presented, just you can draw the conclusion that those are people that had not had the opportunity to buy because of their incomes, but with remote work, they saw the opportunity to be able to live further away and buy for one of the first times ever. And so you had a huge jump in that 35 to 44-year-old population moving out for housing reasons, most likely, but also just the desire to want to live in a place, a quality place that was of interest to them, whether that be a rural place rather than urban. There was that as well going on. But then by 2022, when out migration had slowed some, the 35 to 44-year-olds became third ranked in terms of those who were migrating out of our region. So by 2022, 25 to 29-year-olds have become the next group moving out in the largest quantities. And again, that signifies that the youngest of the young are the ones that seem to really be struggling to stay here when they likely would love to stay here, a lot of them, but haven't been able to. And then for the in-migration, there's less in-migration than out-migration. And those same age groups, like I said, the youngest are the ones that move. And this phenomenon of the age groups, the young age groups moving, is clearly seen in this information here on what percentage of our population by age group is the young workers, and that has been declining. The 25 to 44-year-olds, you see, has gone from in 2019 before the pandemic, it was 29.9, and it dropped. It had the greatest change for the working age groups. It really dropped, and that again is a sign of those migration shifts I just showed you for those age groups. And then what you're also seeing here is the effects in the under 5 age group, which would be our future workers, with birth rates declining. Certainly, this age group share of our population has been declining, as clearly seen in this information. What is really apparent is that from 2019 to 2023 for the under age 5, it went from 6.6 to 5.9, which is a 0.7% change. It did that in just 4 years, whereas from 2010 to 2019, which is the 9 years prior to the pandemic, that shift, it took to do that same amount of shift of 0.7, it took 9 years. Whereas we did it in 4 years. So that goes again to the birth rates dropping, but also I think is a big indicator of their pandemic effects on births, where people weren't having kids during the pandemic for health and safety reasons. But it's also an indicator of the rising cost of living. So people are waiting till later in life to have kids and are not having as many. Because again, everything comes down to the cost of living, is what is really apparent. And then the last thing I'll show you on this one is the 65 or older, the aging of the baby boomers. There were questions about that on the registration as to the affordability of homes for this age group and how we're meeting that need. That was not studied in this report and not something I have further information on at this time, but certainly those are great questions about what the demand is versus the supply for this rising population in our region. So in summary, as you heard me say many times, that the young adults are the drivers and they are low and middle incomes that are moving. And so it's really up to the 120% AMI level that you're seeing people cannot afford to stay here or live here, which would be up to $150,000. And that is what's driving the trend of us losing people to other parts of the US and the region becoming less attractive to the young talent, which will hinder our population and employment growth. It will be more dependent on the immigrants to sustain our population and economy. And the business challenges, just in summary, is that the businesses are having difficulty in attracting and retaining the young talent and highly educated that are right out of college. Much struggling there from that community. And there's a need for businesses to really understand the generational preferences of these young people. If they want to be successful, the best thing to do would be for them to continue to do the hybrid work options, as well as upskill their employees for higher paying jobs. And solutions for a sustainable future, we should really work together on strengthening and expanding our housing programs for the middle income, especially the first-time home buyers, and speed up our housing construction and overhaul our zoning processes. And governments and businesses should consider partnering to address these affordability issues. So that is everything I had. I know that was a lot of data, so you're probably overwhelmed. I can understand completely. So I encourage you to read the report so you can digest everything. But we certainly have time for 10 minutes for questions.
Jill, thank you so much. This was just so interesting and a lot to think about. I'm wondering if you can leave that slide up in the presentation mode for people to maybe digest your last findings while we answer a few questions, if that would work. One thing that really hit me was thinking about, supply as we've been talking in our region about there's not enough. We all know that, right? But then it's really digging in and realizing it's not just supply, it's the type, right? What people today and moving forward will need in the type of housing, in the cost of that housing, and the accessibility of it, what families need, what older people need. So just like looking at the stock of housing we have now and just thinking about how inadequate it is for our changing demographics. That really hit me. So we do have a few questions that folks have offered up. So I will start with a couple of those. And if we have more time, we could take extras. So you're welcome to put another question in the chat if you happen to have one. So I did get a couple of questions about gender and family size. You did touch on family size a little bit, but did you have a sense of male versus female in coming or going, or is that too fine of a detail that you all didn't get into? And then generally, if I have it right, it sounds like younger families depart, whereas older ones may stay longer, but you should verify if I have that right.
Yeah, so for the gender, I did not get into that in the report. That data is certainly available and something I can look into. So that is a great question. So can look into that. And in regards to the household sizes, that information is in the report. And what it shows is that it's the smaller household sizes that are moving in and out. So it's the larger household sizes tend to be those who have owned their homes for a while and have established their families already. But those who are still mobile and young tend to have just gotten married and not had kids yet, possibly. And so that since you're just starting a family and moving, um, you would not have as you would have a smaller household size, and that is clearly what the data is showing. It's those smaller household sizes without um, many kids, if any,
Right.
that would be moving.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you. Let me see another one. On that dot map, the one that showed the cost, the value of homes versus people's income, and if you were below that blue dotted line versus above it, there was a question about renting versus home ownership. Do you think that that map or dot map that you had, would that be generally similar if it were renters, or do you think it would change a lot? Do you know the one I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Let's see. Let me share my screen.
sure.
Let's see. Believe. All right. Are you?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, this one. So I'll go back to that.
Yes, that
Yeah.
one.
And so this one, before we go into that, part of the answer would be what I meant to address is why the domestic migration was really lower in this past year than it had been post-pandemic. That that slowing you have in 2022 to 2023, and then the much lower rates in 23 to 24 would be really indicative of the high interest rates keeping people from moving. And that was a phenomenon throughout the entire country, not just Northern Virginia, that because of the high interest rates from 23 to 24, your your low and middle population communities around the U.S. rather than your large ones also did not see the in-migration that they were seeing in the years before that. And we didn't see the out-migration. So it was really a national phenomenon that everybody did not experience the in or out migration they were used to from the previous years. And you can largely attribute that to the interest rates keeping people in their homes and therefore renters were unable to move and purchase the homes that they wanted to ideally purchase. So when the supply is lacking and people can't move or don't want to move, everybody's affected, renters and owners. And so once the interest rates go down some, or people realize that they're just here to stay and that they're going to have to just sell no matter what, then you likely will see these numbers rise once again.
Sure,
So I
like,
think this was just a sign of the times of the interest rates rather than this being our norm. I don't think this will be the norm because of remote work and hybrid being here to stay.
okay.
And our affordable housing costs just worsening.
Yes.
And that's for both the renters and the owners. But what this really says also is that if the people that are really moving out of this region are moving because for to buy the homes, well, only interest rates would only affect the home buyers. They wouldn't affect the renters. So this really, I think, indicates that it's the people wanting to buy that are moving out rather than wanting to get more affordable rents is what I would just would be thinking is going on here until I look at the data further to see how many renters moved versus owners. That would just be my impression as to what's going on.
That sounds good. Thank you. And on the dot one that you were on a minute ago, someone was asking if you know why the Falls Church data point was so high and off by itself versus some of the others?
Yeah, that would mainly be, as you can see for Falls Church, their home prices are just incredibly higher than the rest of the region, and that's largely due to their supply of housing
Mhm.
being much more single family detached heavy than the other jurisdictions that have a lot of condos, for instance,
Mhm.
or a lot of townhomes. Again, Falls Church is very single family detached heavy, so their typical home value is much higher and off the charts than the rest of them. And the incomes to afford those certainly are very high, as you see here, above 250,000.
Yes. And thank you. That makes good sense. Supply is short there, and the type of supply is maybe an example, an exaggerated example of what else is going on with supply and the cost of especially ownership in the region. A few people have been asking, of course, it's so early to know any data about the impacts of federal workers being fired and that trickle down into other, consultants and contractors and all the way through our local economy. And wondering if this is a report that you all update regularly, or if not, if this is the kind of such a watershed year for drastic change, if it might be something that a year from now these data points would change.
Um, these data points, I will be updating them, but not every year. The
Mm.
most ideal time to update this will be when the 2025 or 2026 data comes out from the IRS, and it's always a 2 or 3 year lag. So unfortunately, we will not know the 2025-26 impacts until like 2029 or so,
Oh, wow.
2028, 29. So unfortunately, we have to wait several years to see the true impact of all of this, but there certainly have been surveys out there. The George Mason University, along with the Washington Post, just did a survey showing that I think it was either 20% or 25% of people want to leave the region. And you can look up that survey if you're interested in that subject. I I would highly encourage looking at it. Just Google George Mason and Washington Post moving patterns from the federal government, and you should be able to find it. And if I find it, I can send it on to
Thank you.
Hannah and Alice and let them put it in the email, which probably would be the easiest thing. So why don't I do that, get that for you, because it was very eye-opening as to the patterns we are likely to see from this federal impact.
Yeah. I know we're on time and we're at time and we need to wrap up, but I did see one more question that's so interesting. Could you point us to any more frequent data for our region that would come in that would give some insights into, like, by next year, the year after, what the impacts of this kind of earthquake that we're
Mhm.
in and about to experience?
Yeah. One thing I could look into and that I will be monitoring though, it won't go into the same amount of detail that the IRS data does,
Mm-hmm.
but the Census Bureau's American Community Survey does have the migration data, and they do it once a year. They always have a lag time. And so the 2025 data will come out in late 2026, which is where I'd be able to analyze how many people moved and who were those movers.
Yeah.
So certainly that's available and something I can and will plan to track and can report back certainly over the next few years as to what we see once that data is out.
Well, thank you so much, Jill. This has been fascinating. Clearly, people were interested, lots of questions. We appreciate what you're doing to keep the community and the region informed about the trends and helping us use that data in advocacy and policy work to lift up what the gaps are, what the challenges are, and talk with our leaders about how to begin to address those more directly. So thank you so much for being here. We appreciate your presentation, and thank you all for being here today.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jill.